Seeing none, might I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda as presented? Councillor Melnick, thank you. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you, Councillor Wilson, for turning on your camera for that vote. The minutes of the regular meeting of January 18th have been circulated. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? Seeing none, I would invite a motion to approve the minutes as presented. Councillor Waxer, thank you. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. We have no presentations scheduled for today. So we can move to agenda item 5. Is there any business arising from previous minutes? Seeing nothing, we can move to agenda item 6, bylaws. We have a few for consideration today. Agenda item 6.1 is just a review bylaw summary. 6.2 is the supplementary assessment of improvements bylaw for 2022. Here for third reading, having received certification from Parks Canada after second reading. Is there any need for discussion with respect to the supplementary assessment of improvements bylaw? Seeing nothing, I would invite a motion from a councillor that council read for the third time bylaw number 241, supplementary assessment of improvements bylaw 2022, being a bylaw of the specialized municipality of Jasper in the province of Alberta, to authorize the supplementary assessment of improvements for the taxation year 2022. As I was reading, I thought I missed a hand. Councillor Waxer, you're prepared to make that motion. Thank you very much. There is no debate. I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. The companion bylaw to bylaw 241 is bylaw 242, the supplementary tax bylaw for 2022. Again, having received second reading and park certification, is before us for third reading. Do I have a councillor prepared to make that motion? Councillor Wilson, you're prepared to make that motion. Thank you. I have a motion then from Councillor Wilson that council read for the third time bylaw number 242, supplementary tax bylaw 2022, being a bylaw of the specialized municipality of Jasper in the province of Alberta, to authorize the imposition of a supplementary tax for the taxation year 2022. Is there any debate on that motion? I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. That takes us to the utility fees levy and collection bylaw 2022, also here for third reading and also having received park certification after second reading. And it is now before us. I would invite a motion, and then I'm anticipating some debate on this one. Councillor Demota.
Well, before we go into debate, or even if someone's considering a motion, I might ask to maybe defer this for another couple of weeks for decision, just so we could do a little bit more research if we don't get the information we need today. And I'm just saying that because it was brought to our attention, myself and other councillors, that there are a few commercial properties that also have residential combination within their framework. So the newer builds have a 2-inch access pipe, I guess, or utility pipe that goes to the property for fire suppression. And where some of the older builds have a 1-inch pipe or smaller. I know that there's not a lot of them, but that forces these building owners to be in a different bracket when it comes to utility rates, considering the connection fee. So I don't know if we want to discuss that in advance, because I'm not prepared to make a motion when there's that much of an inequity. And I want to hear more from other councillors to see if they have any input on that.
Thank you for that, Councillor Demoda. You indicated that depending upon responses you might get to questions today, or the lack of responses, you might be inclined to defer. Do you have specific questions that you have for administration rather than for debate among council? Sure.
So right now with the proposal that we have going through first and second reading, because of those discovered inequities in the system, or with the proposed process, is there an opportunity to look at individual properties that fall outside of this proposed framework for levying utility rates and recovery as far as capital and consumption? So the idea being, and maybe there could be a better clarification for the general public. We've been informed that because a property has a 2-inch pipe going to their property for water suppression, doesn't necessarily mean that 2-inch pipe is going to be providing more water to those buildings. The 2-inch pipe is there for fire suppression purposes, and therefore not continually being used for fire suppression. And the ratepayers of those properties, I think, would be treated unfairly if they were levied for the size of pipe, is what I'm saying, I guess. Can we build something into the framework where we can address those one-offs?
Thank you, Councillor Demoda. Mr. Given, I saw your hand raised. Go ahead.
Sure, thanks, Your Worship. So if the question is, can we build a system that addresses one-offs? I guess it depends on what council would define as a one-off. As the model currently sits, and as demonstrated council previously, it is applied equitably to all types of properties, meaning it's applied the same way. Sorry, I won't even say equitably. That's a super fancy way of saying it. It is applied to the same way to all properties. There are differences absolutely between properties. One property may serve a single business off a single line. Another property may serve multiple businesses and multiple residential units off of a single line. And so we earlier had a discussion about how many, the cost per unit. In one of the previous council discussions, there was a cost, even floating the idea of, well, what would the cost be per bathroom? And council can appreciate there are many, many different ways to divide these costs. The use of meter sizing in relationship to infrastructure costs is commonly used across the province. It was used in the community that I came from, but in that case, it was most often applied at new development. And so, the experience that I've seen is, based on the size of your meter, you pay a connection charge up front in the multiple thousands of dollars, up to, depending on the size of your service line, I've seen connection charges for large industrial facilities of up to $500,000. And that utility model was basically predicated on there being a whole bunch of new development that was going to pay for improvements to the system. Obviously, Jasper doesn't have that same opportunity here because we don't have new development happening all the time. I think the other thing from an administrative perspective would be that the volume of water that goes through any size of pipe is intended to be accounted for in the consumption charge, which is, as council knows, a tiered consumption charge in the bylaw that's in front of you. So, you know, we did have a discussion about how much weight should be on consumption versus these other factors. Council has sort of seen a few different examples of that. So the volume of water that goes through is an independent discussion compared to the size of the service line, because while a fire flow service line is not required for day-to-day operations and does not impact the day-to-day consumption of that building or that property, I think it is fair to assume that the rest of the system needs to be in adequate condition to ensure that when fire flow is required to that property, that our system infrastructure is capable of handling it. So I think that that's, you know, I can appreciate that no matter which way we choose to divide these costs, the basic fact is that it is going to be an increase for all users. I know that council's done a lot of work to try to find, you know, a model that would be, you know, a balanced approach, but it will be an impact on all users. I suppose the other differentiator is whether each individual unit is separately metered, and that is an approach that would be used. I think an example that was given before would be that there may have been a duplex or fourplex that might have been served by 1 meter in the past. That I don't believe is allowed anymore. Each unit would need to have its own meter. And so we may be dealing with some properties that are serving multiple units off 1 meter, which again is a sort of a one-off. And it would be up to the property owners to figure out how to divide those utility costs across all of the units that are served by that single service line. The municipality obviously can't decide that unit A that is residential should only pay this much of that total cost for that property, and unit B, which is commercial, should pay that much. It gets to be significantly more challenging for us as the operator of the utility when we're not the landlord who is in a position of allocating the expenses of the building, like common area costs and other things. So the model that's in front of you, if council felt that they were not comfortable with it, I think that the best direction would be a couple of different things. If council has a preferred alternate solution, they could amend the bylaw to charge different rates. I would advise that there's some caution there because you don't have the benefit of having the financial model at your hands to know exactly if you pick this many dollars here and that many dollars there, whether it actually totals the amount of money that we're required to operate the utility this year. So there's some caution there about picking your own numbers. Administration did provide previously what the consumption rates would be if we did not have a capital or connection charge and simply went with flat water and wastewater cubic meter rates. I can provide those. They're $1.96 per cubic meter for water and $3.52 per cubic meter for sewer. If council, felt that the CCC rate model needed more investigation, perhaps a fallback position would be just to go back to flat water, flat consumption rate and no charge for the connection or capital fees. Those rates of $1.96 and $3.52 would generate the amount of money that we need for the utility this year. And the reason that I raise that as a fallback that might allow more time for discussion and inquiry and testing is because we are getting at a point where we're in the new calendar year. We are responsible for informing customers about what their rates will be. And if we go another couple of weeks for third reading, or if there are any other changes, and we have to go through a park certification process or any other additional processes, we will start to lose the ability to give reasonable, a reasonable heads up to utility customers about what their charges are going to be. And so If council felt that more thought needed to be given to the connection consumption capital concept, then the best approach might be to set the rates for 2022 based on the flat rate, and come back at this again, and council can give administration more direction on the types of one-off situations that they might like to solve. And we could do that for 2023. But there is that imperative of understanding, helping our customers understand what they're going to need to pay, and ensuring that the utility collects the amount of money that it needs to collect for operations. Your worship, I know that there's no motion on the table, which is probably a good time for me to give that preamble. I'm happy to answer any specific questions that people have, but I'll do my best to ensure that that I'm answering only questions that are directly posed.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given, both the backgrounder and the invitation to be available for questions, so that we don't have to yet get into debate if there are more questions of administration before we take a motion. Are there other questions that councillors have, particularly for administration, with respect to the status of the presumed bylaw, or the in-process bylaw number 243? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. It's a bit awkward. We've been working on this one for quite a while, and just as of late, we've received some correspondence, like within the last week. I think that correspondence is what Rico's alluding to, but or sorry, Councillor Demoto's alluding to, but it's not attached to the agenda. So it's hard to speak to any concerns. We haven't had any concerns from the community except for this correspondence that is not attached. So I don't want to speak too much to it just yet. Was there a reason why it wasn't included? Did the author not request that it wasn't?
Your worship, for Councillor Wilson, no, there were a couple of letters that were provided. Mayor Ireland did connect with the author of one piece of correspondence, who said they were open to having it, and it was just an oversight of not having it attached to the agenda. Certainly have it. I know that council members are aware of it, and we can ensure that it's added to the minutes. It was just an oversight in not getting it attached to this agenda.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given, and just for the aid of council, and in particular the public and those who are watching. We received 3 letters last week, one with a spreadsheet of calculations, just indicating the impact of the proposed changes on some properties. And council has had the benefit of seeing all of that. It was addressed to all of council and forwarded to administration, but the broader public has not. And it is of interest, I think, to mention this, because to some extent, those pieces of correspondence and the attached document may impact some councillors' views as expressed today, and it's difficult sometimes to go forward when that information is not public. So it will become public, and I acknowledge for those members of the public who did communicate that the documents have been received by all of council and read, and will form part of the minutes in due course. And it's unfortunate they're not part of today's agenda, but they will be part of the public record, and will presumably have some impact on individual councillors today as we move forward. So thank you, Councillor Wilson, for that. Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Your Worship. We did have a discussion, of course, on the January 18th regular council meeting, and I do regret that I didn't bring up during that discussion. There was a comment was made about the allocation of this particular formula, and it was suggested that we review this after 4 billing periods as to seeing how the effectiveness of this change sits across the whole community. And I didn't see any reference to that. I think it was a suggestion that we would bring up after that 4 billing period, or 8 months, to be able to take a look to see if we have 3, 4, 5 inequities, or potentially 12 inequities. And it may be easier for us to deal with inequities at that time, but the whole system may not be broken. I do see that if we do go to the combined rates of 196 and 352, we will be passing a line, as opposed to this model. We will be passing or changing our utility consumption rates by 37% across the board for residents and businesses. So this may be a more equitable model for the overall community, and as we try to recapitalize our plant, and we just may have some unique situations that need addressing. And I'd like to suggest that that might be the route to go forward, being prepared to look at how this has affected ratepayers, understanding, of course, everyone is going to be contributing to the capital costs, which were part of the budget.
Thank you, Councillor Melnick. Councillor Demota.
And I appreciate that. You know, like I wasn't fully prepared to address this in the manner that I wanted to. Administration has the better terminology, so I appreciate Mr. Given stepping forward and providing some clarity. Sorry about that. I'll come back to my question. I just have to address something here.
In the absence of the conclusion of Councillor Devota's question, I just wanted to comment on Councillor Melnick's observations. I was aware 2 weeks ago that there was potential for inequity in this system, and agreed with Councillor Melnick that we should at least schedule a review to address inequities as we see this roll out. One of the issues is that the inequities perhaps are greater than I had anticipated. And so the question is, who pays the price as we wait through 4 billing cycles to see what there is to be adjusted? And one of the questions I have is whether there is an opportunity for redress for people who might get, or users who might get charged significantly now, and we later adjust the rate. So if there is no opportunity for redress down the road, then it's more important that we try and get it right as quickly as we can. The second thing I have, and this for Mr. Given and administration, is whether there is yet an opportunity to attach connection and capital fees to something other than pipe size. Because pipe size, I think, had been seen as potentially an inequitable solution, but it had other factors that favored it, including, of course, administrative ease. We know how big the pipes are. But would it be possible maintaining the consumption, connection, capital 3-part stool to base connection and capital costs on something like zoning? So we have, I think, R1 through R4 and C1 through C4 as our basic zoning premise in the community. Would we achieve greater equity if all C1 properties, for example, had a connection fee appropriate to them, and all residential properties of the same class had a set fee. I appreciate there's an awful lot of work involved in that, but is there any other available metric that could be used to come to the same result, maintain the principle of connection, consumption, and capital, but not based on pipe size? And I appreciate that's pretty broad, and you might just say yes, but it'll take us till September to figure it out.
Your worship, I think that's a part of the answer is yes, and it's subjective. Is why it would take till September to figure it out. Is what does council wish those dividing lines to be? In the C, in the commercial area, or even in the industrial area. Actually, let's use the industrial area as an example. We have operations that are commercial in nature in the industrial area that consume little to no water. They're essentially an office with a bathroom, and they probably consume very, very little water. And in the commercial area is our community's only car wash, which consumes a whole bunch of water. And I guess the question for council is it equitable if both of those made the same contribution to the infrastructure that provided the service to them? Yeah, I probably have a view on that. Certainly one has more draw and would need more, and also would need a higher availability. If we tell a car wash that their water is not going to be working for a few days, sorry, that's just the way that it goes. They probably would take a different view of that than you saying at the office, or the bathroom at the office is going to be out of order for a few days because the pipes on the way to the office, needed a repair. So, those two different types of businesses are located in the same zoning, but they have different needs for water. They have a different demand on the system. And so zoning would be a challenging, that's an off the cuff comment. But in the same token, in the commercial core of our community, we have hotels that have a different demand, and restaurants that have a different demand again. And they're all, I think, generally in the same zoning district. So I'm not sure that would be the clearest cut measure. There might be other measures, but I think administration would need council's direction on which ones to explore, if not the one that is objective and measurable, which is meter size. Again, objective, measurable, and a common approach that is used all across wherever there are water utilities, frankly. Not all communities will bill based on meter size or ask for a capital contribution, some subsidized through property tax rates. But administration's recommendation to council would be that meter size is appropriate. I think the question that council may be struggling with is, how much do we put on meter size? Right? Like I'm not sure that is there a better metric? I think it is, how much weight do we place on that category, which was the discussion that we had before, and is something that could be adjusted. Your worship, you did also ask another question about redress. I don't know that the municipality would have the capacity, and I'd have to discuss this with finance. I think it would be challenging for us to collect money. If we over collected, as in if the model delivered more revenue than the municipality needed, then we may have the ability to provide a refund to certain customers. But if the model collected only the amount of money that we needed, but collected it from the wrong people, then we'd have to go to the one class of customer that we didn't collect enough from and ask them to pony up some more so we could pay it back to, So you can see that would be a bit challenging. Certainly the opportunity to review the model after 4 billing cycles would give us a chance to adjust rates. So if we needed to have a mid-year rate adjustment to correct for anything that was unexpected. And again, administration has tested the model on all of the properties in the municipality. So we don't believe that there's anything that would be really unexpected, but certainly we would have that ability to adjust. I don't know that it would give us the ability though to pay back somebody that felt that they were overcharged unless we had actually collected more money than we expected to collect.
Thank you for that, Mr. Gibbon. And just to confirm, my question, that the later one that you responded to was a bit rhetorical. I had maybe hoped that you would say, oh yes, of course we can do that, but not expecting that. But that is a challenge. But of course it wouldn't be that somebody thinks they have overpaid. It would be they pay what we charge, and then later we change the manner of calculation. And I appreciate the absolute challenge we have there. Councillor Demota, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to get back, and I do apologize for that interruption. It was something I wasn't anticipating at the moment. Yeah, so I do have a few questions, and you know what, I was one of the councillors that wanted to go with a medium contribution across the board when it came to the Triple C process. So I was naive to, you know, the matter that's come into focus right now. So my question, like Mayor Arlen's, was could we have an appeal process much like we do assessments? And I think somewhere we could find some funds for, or put something aside for those types of scenarios, hoping that they're not going to be that excessive. Like I'm really on the same page as Councillor Melnick. I would like to see this thing through and then see where, you know, the chips fall, but I don't want you know, users to fall into a category where it's going to be kind of like an extreme you know, amount. One thing that I do want to clarify though, when we talk about replacement of capital and the meter size, how much of that gets addressed during the initial offsite levy when the buildings are erected and then they get taxed on certain you know, services and access to municipal works? Does that make sense? Because are we double dipping now on those charges?
I can't, thanks Councillor Demota, I can't at hand speak to the municipal offsite levies. I can certainly look that up while we're having the discussion here and see. But there certainly is a contribution for new properties for their impact on municipal services. There is a difference there because I think the entire intent of the capital program here is to recognize that the municipality has been regularly underfunding its investment in infrastructure. So for a number of years, at least since 2017, as the 2017 asset management report investigated our municipal infrastructure and recommended that in the water and wastewater area, the municipality should be annually putting in $1.67 million. And I'm kind of rounding a little bit off the edges there, but about $1.67 million. And my recollection from the reports is that we've been underfunding that you know, to the tune of nearly $1 million a year. And so even if businesses did make an upfront contribution to improvements that needed to happen to support that new development, the question is, how should the community pay for its regular reinvestment in our wastewater treatment plant or the distribution lines that serve? Like, it's not just about growth. In many other communities, those offsite levies will be collected in order to pay for improvements that are needed in the system to help it expand to meet new growth. That's less of an issue here in Jasper. Here our issue is aged infrastructure that needs to have reinvestment on an ongoing basis. And so we can do the math to check and see, and I'm sorry that I don't have that number at hand, but certainly if they would have paid an offsite levy, that would have gone into infrastructure, and the municipality does need annual contributions towards infrastructure to ensure that we're regularly maintaining our assets.
It's good. I appreciate that answer, and I appreciate you trying to add some clarity to my question, because I know some of it is vague, and I'm trying to be as clear as possible to the best knowledge I have, particularly when it comes down to the semantics of, the proper terms to be using right now. I do with that, I know we're not going to get it perfect for everyone, but if we have a 3,000 or a $3 million, 3-point-something million dollar, $3.6 million target, it's got to get paid for somehow. And that's what I guess the broader community needs to fully understand. So no matter how it gets addressed, we need to pay that bill. I appreciate that in 2017, we had a study done. The 2017 study didn't anticipate a 2+ year pandemic. And I don't like to add excuses to scenarios, because this is what's caused our issue, our $1 million a year downfall to date. So I don't want to push it back any further, but I think we should have some processes put in place so that there can be an appeal of utilities at some point, because technically this is a pilot project in its own sense, because this is our first time expanding into this 3C scenario with going full blast pretty much on a medium scale through all processes. So I think there's going to be some fallout. We don't know exactly where. We do have an indication right now because of some people that have made early observations where fallouts could be. So having said that and having that knowledge, I want them and other people in the community to have some type of trigger process or an appeal process where we can review and then maybe work with them down the road. And maybe it's not about giving them their money back that year. Right now, I find it hard to be asking people for more money, in an extraneous amount when it's not necessary. But if there could be some type of payback system going forward where they might pay less to compensate for the amount that they initially put in, if there's a valve to help that compensation somehow, and then still keep the greater good moving forward with the process. Because I think if this works really good for the majority and we have a couple of cracks that we need to address, then let's address the cracks and not make them a huge issue and impede the entire process. We already went through that with speed limits, so I don't want to see another one of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor DeBona. Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. I too, I'm not 100% sure anymore, and I was very confident last week, but my question, and I apologize if this is too short notice, but do you have any idea, Mr. Given, what the author of the letter, the property, and if it was a smaller line instead of the big line, like what would it be? What would the difference be? And again, I apologize. I'm trying to understand this whole process, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks through his worship, Councillor Hall. Yeah, this question's come up a bit, if we're sort of meter sizing, and Councillor DeMota brought it up, but early on, is it, does this create a perverse incentive for people to want to have smaller lines? And that was something that administration did want to check. Based on the bylaw that's in front of you, if you had, the minimum annual charge for connection and capital charges, so you have connection charge on the sewer side and on the water side, and the same for capital on each. It's about $650 a year for each of those, and you would do that by seven units, and so the total cost would be about $4,500. The model as it's applied here, that's about $1,000 less, so it is less, but it is not less by a large amount. So there is not a really significant savings of having a smaller meter size and a whole bunch of smaller lines over having one larger line. So to be clear, the system does weight it a little bit more to larger lines, with the assumption that larger lines are most often used in commercial properties. But as you can see, if each of those 7 units was served with a line of 1 inch or under, the total cost for that property would be very close to the same as it is under the current bylaw.
Councillor Keller-Hrampe.
Through you, Mr. Mayor Ireland, Mr. Given, on the 3Cs, the capital, we have to replace 1.67 million yearly. And to get up to where we want to be, I think currently we're taking 5 years to do that. Am I correct, Mr. Given?
That's correct, Councillor Keller-Hrampe.
You know, I think we need to move in this direction, but I'm wondering if we're too aggressive. I wonder if we take a few years longer, ease it in, and especially coming out of COVID, I think a lot of people are concerned. Not only that, but I know a lot of people in town have got their current bills from the utility companies, and they've all gone up about 25%, 30%. So I think people are concerned. I've had a few phone calls in the last 2 weeks, and I've talked to a couple of people, and they said, you know, could we take the capital portion and level it out longer? And we still get there, but it takes a little bit longer to get there. Because really, if something happened today, we would have to get a loan. And if we don't have it in the reserves, we do have to get a loan. So maybe we go with our 3Cs, but we take a little bit longer on the capital side to get there.
Go ahead, Mr. Given.
Yeah, for Councillor Keller-Hrampe, I think the one observation administration would make is that the budget has been approved, and so we do need to collect this amount of money this year. If council chose to take, you know, a 7-year phase in or a 10-year phase in of the capital, our recommendation would be that would, you know, that would appear in those future years. That lengthening of that term would appear in future years. So we would have smaller rate increases in the capital charges in, you know, in 2023 and beyond. The 2022 amount, again, that we need to collect for this year is set in the budget that's been approved by council. And again, really just is sort of apportioning that amount about how we want to apportion it. But certainly it is within council's power. If you decided that it was a need to slow down that transition to collecting the amount of money that was recommended in 2017 and take, you know, 7 years or 10 years to do that rather than the 5 years that we're proposing, that is available to you when setting the 2023 rates.
Thank you, Mr. Given.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Given. Looking at the current utility bylaw, I don't see any provision in that bylaw for what we were talking about, a mode of appeal. And perhaps as we get to, if this bylaw was to be passed, on the understanding that it would be reviewed after 4 billing periods, we would then have a better understanding of where we are in the community. In future bylaws, a provision could be added in where we might have a better understanding of how an appeal might work. I'm hesitant to to change this bylaw to put an appeal in until we've tested this system. But I think it might be prudent to have that in a future bylaw so it's clear to everybody when an appeal can be made and when it can't. And I think that requires a lot more consideration and actually seeing what type of discrepancies may or may not come up. Again, you know, everyone's bill is going to go up. Everyone could feel they're paying too much. The reality is there's that capital cost we have to start recovering year over year in order to maintain our system. I'm wondering what the appetite is among councillors to move ahead with that type of thought process where a more formal ability to review previous year's bills are done the year after. And again, Mr. Given, if that's even a possibility.
Your worship, for Councillor Melnick. So certainly anything is possible, and administration could, I'm sure, identify a process or forum for residents who wish to sort of appeal their utility billing. The caution that I would give council is that, in my experience, appeals are generally meant to check to see whether the law was applied correctly, rather than whether the law was fair, because people's definition of fair may change. And so I've seen it most often in a land use context. So somebody can appeal the decision of a development officer saying, well, they didn't apply the development rules appropriately in my case. And that's sort of the basis. Now, whether the rules were fair in the first place is a whole other discussion that usually isn't appealable, because that's up to the political decision-making of council. So administration could create a process for allowing customers to come forward, and formalized process for allowing them to ask for a review or to appeal their billing. And I will say that today, if any customer came forward and said that they felt that their bill had been calculated incorrectly, like if we had incorrectly applied the bylaw, we would make that correction. So if we had it down on paper that somebody had a 2-inch meter and they said, no, you know what, here's my building plan, and here's my, here's the documentation that shows that I only have a 1.5-inch meter, well, then we would certainly correct that, and we wouldn't need an appeal process. We want to make sure that we're doing things by the letter of the law that's passed. And if there is an inconsistency in how it was applied, or if we had incorrect underlying information that led to a poor outcome, then we would just correct that, and we would do that administratively without the need for a process. But certainly, council, administration could create a process. I think that it's probably unnecessary, because if there was, if we'd applied it incorrectly, we would fix that. If if it was brought to our attention. I think that the bigger concern that council will probably face is the public disputing the fairness of the bylaw, which is not the same as disputing how the bylaw was applied.
Thank you for that. Councillor Demota.
Well, just a little clarification in the numbers, because I was adding up, like, you can separate capital and connection out, but if you put them all together, at 1.5-inch, or let's just say 2-inch, is going to be like an annual $5,500 contribution on just those two, never mind consumption. And then the billing for a 1-inch line, the base is going to be $650. So that's a $4,800 swing, right? When you calculate capital and connection all together, leaving that out. So I know that I was looking for a moderate solution across the board, but it still seems that there could be a little bit of work done, because that does seem a little extreme. Maybe to me, I'm not sure. I just, after I crunched those numbers together, I never did that holistically prior to that. I'm just throwing that out there, and does that make sense? Mr. Given?
Well, sure. I just want to make sure that my previous comments, had the right context, or that it was clear about what I was saying. You're exactly correct on the calculation of the 5,500. That's what a 2-inch line would pay when you have all these charges that are not consumption. So if we set aside consumption, assume it's zero, what would you pay in connection and capital charges? $5,500 on a 2-inch line, correct. The point that I was making previously was that if you look at it on a per unit basis and add up the minimum amount, if each of those 7 properties were served with a 5/8-inch line, how much would each of those 7 properties pay? They would each pay $650 a year. So what is the total of that across 7 properties? So 650 times 7 is $4,550. So that's what I was speaking about. So really and again, I hope that I was clear that, and in acknowledging that, yes, it is slightly more expensive to have a 2-inch line versus 7 1-inch lines. But it is not, well, I guess it's, I mean, this is subjective. I'm not sure that that would rise to the level of punitive, punitively different. It is $1,000 different, 100% correct, but it is also not, it is quite a long ways away when you look at it at what each unit would pay if they were served by their own individual water line.
Thank you all for that. I don't see other hands up at the moment. Appreciate that councillors are considering whether any of them are prepared to make a motion for third reading. I have a question, perhaps Mr. Given, that you could comment upon. I have been, as I indicated, concerned about inequity, but also concerned with moving forward and at least establishing this CCC approach to utility billing. I think absolutely we're on the right track, and there will be some pain in adjusting, I suppose, and some residents now have brought to our attention that they can foresee that degree of pain. In some respects to the propositions put forward by Councillor Demoda and Councillor Melnick, I think this is an appeal process. We don't even have the bylaw, and we have residents appealing to us, and so that's fair. That's the way we should operate. I don't know that we need to embed in the bylaw another appeal process, because I agree with your comments, Mr. Given, that at the end of the day, if administration is applying the bylaw appropriately, there can't be an appeal on the rates that council set, other than to appeal to council to change the bylaw, which is where we're at. In my roundabout way, I'm getting to the question. If we were to continue with our proposal for 4 billing cycles and revisit this, say in September, and at that time determined that we wanted to address inequities based on pipe size, I appreciate your earlier response that it would be pretty hard to give money back to people who had paid too much, and even more difficult to try and collect it from people who hadn't been charged. But it seems to me, and I would be prepared to support a proposition where, if council determines that there are inequities to be addressed, we might give a credit to those who had paid too much. So no money back, but at least a credit moving forward to recognize that we had been complicit in an inequity. But then for those who presumably didn't pay enough, where would we find the necessary funds to balance the books? If we decided to give credits moving forward for those who had paid too much, would we just be able to produce, or would we have to find another source to compensate for those who had not been charged sufficiently, and we didn't know that until after the adjustments?
Your Worship, I just want to make sure that I understand the question correctly. Would we need to find another source to compensate?
Not to compensate, but to balance the book. So 8 months out, suppose we said, yes, we see now that predicating everything on pipe size led to inequities. We prefer to adjust those. We can't give you money back, but we can give you a credit. We're not going to collect anything more from anybody. Would we then, and I appreciate this is all speculative, but would we then need to find a source, well, I guess for the upcoming year, because there would be a credit for some, but there wouldn't be real revenue? Where would that come from? Would that just come from general taxation?
Your Worship, so thank you for clarifying. So to fund the credits, I think is sort of the question. How would we fund the credits? Because they would be foregone revenue. We'd be limiting our revenue potential, and we would still need to make a certain amount to be able to operate the utility in a given year. And if we're not making that through rates, where does it come from? Council could, we have relatively small municipal reserves. There is the COVID recovery reserve that's available. That could be a potential funding source, or through general municipal property taxes. So it is, which, I think it would be a question for council to consider whether it's, beneficial to have that, to have municipal property taxes increase in order to pay credits on the utility side of the ledger. I know that the municipality has always strived to have the utilities be relatively self-supporting, but council could make a choice about how much it wished to subsidize utility rates, and providing a credit like you described would essentially be a tax subsidization of utility rates. It is possible, and it would be up to council to decide whether that is preferable.
Thank you for that. Councillor Demota.
Sorry if I missed it, but I think there's also the federal gas tax too, which we came in and was initially going to be put towards, or suggested to be put towards, meter replacement, and but we still have some in reserve for that, and potentially a little more coming in for next year. I don't want to take away from opportunities for the next budget to help with some of that relief, but could that be used?
So that's actually, Councillor Demota through Mayor Island, that's a very direct answer. No, it could not.
Okay.
Fund credits. That fund is specifically for infrastructure, for capital projects. The federal government passes that on to municipalities with the intention that it will improve infrastructure. Potentially you could look at it as substituting. We could fund some infrastructure project that we would have otherwise done through utility rates, and that would reduce the amount of that the capital charge would go up, but we wouldn't be able to provide credits to individual customers using that grant.
Thank you for that. We took a different track that had been anticipated in our discussions so far on this topic, and that is to reopen it to questions to administration. And if there are more, I would welcome those. But I think in the absence of other questions for Mr. Gibbon or administration, it is time for council to debate where we're at. Councillor Demota.
Well, thank you. So if we do nothing, this has the potential to come back to us in the same form in 2 weeks. If the motion gets made and gets defeated, that doesn't mean that we can't speak to this again. We just can't speak to this again in this format unless it gets rescinded. So, I'm just talking about the options there. I do want to move forward in some fashion. But I'm just wondering if there is a better schedule that we could look at, understanding that we have $3.6 million to, that's the goal. So when we change something in one category, it's going to get spread out over the other. How does that look? And how do we wish to approach that if that's the way council wants to go? So I'm just throwing that out there. I know we've discussed that to length, but that's the beginning here for where we need to go in my mind.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Councillor Keller-Hempy.
And if we didn't want to go with the 3 Cs, if we went with the 196 and 356, that's 37% increase. I think this Councillor Melnick said. Would that be right across the board for everybody, or would that be within a tiered if we did go back to that?
Your Worship, for Councillor Keller-Hempy, those rates were flat across the board. And so for, no, that's the direct answer. It was flat across the board. There was no tiered consumption charge considered in that.
So everybody, regardless whether you're residential or business, should be paying 37% increase.
Yes, I suppose that's true. I suppose another way to look at it would be if you're a small volume consumer, the 30% increase, a 30% increase on $10 is much different than a 30% increase on $1,000. So that might be the only other consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbon.
Councillor Demota?
I appreciate where Councillor Keller and MP was going with that question, but is 30%, 37% on a certain amount as bad as 400% on another area? So, and I think that's where, the issue is, and we see that in front of us. So is there a way that we can address that so it ends up being a little bit more equitable? I can't do the math right now. I'm trying. And also pay attention to the date and try to come out with a good answer here. So we might have to go back to the drawing board before any decisions get made today, but I'm open.
In the absence of a motion before council, I have one final question, Mr. Gibbon. Just confirmation, if you can. There seems to be some discussion about potentially changing Schedule 1 of the bylaw, but not the bylaw itself. Having received Parks certification after second reading, which includes a particular schedule, do you anticipate an issue with going back to Parks for certification if the schedule changes?
Your Worship, no, I don't. I mean, this would be speculative, but the basis that Parks certifies our bylaws on is that there are no impacts on the environment and that there is no encroachment on Canada's authority in the areas of land use planning and development. I think in both those cases, no matter what the rates are, the answer would be no. The only way that I could squint at it and suggest that there might be would be if the concept of a tiered consumption was seen to be more environmentally sound than a flat rate consumption. The tiered consumption theoretically encourages conservation where a flat rate consumption does not. That's about the only way that I could squint at it. I'm not sure that Mr. Fair and Parks Canada would consider it that way. I think it is very likely that they would say utility charges are the domain of the municipality and they may choose what they wish to choose. And so I think if the schedule changes, I don't believe that we would need to seek that sort of third second certification.
Thank you. A reassuring assessment, to be sure. So the matter is here on our agenda for third reading in some form. Councillor Melnick.
Thank you. Again, we've had a conversation about progressing to a change in billing in order to address our capital shortfall. In the future, I'm sure that rates and or sizes of pipe, perhaps, categories could be extended to create more categories, which might make things more equitable. But I think this is an opportunity for us to go forward where we do have a plan that will change and where there is a tiered consumption in this model. It also allows for future years for us to tweak this model. I would make the motion that we read for the third time bylaw 243, being a bylaw of the specialized municipality of Jasper in the province of Alberta, to provide the levying and collection of fees for the provision of water, sewer, solid waste, and recycling services in 2022.
Thank you, Councillor Melnick. We now have a motion on the floor. I will invite you, if you wish, Councillor Melnick, to open debate on that motion.
Thank you, Your Worship. I make this motion, again, considering that we have heard from some residents. I do want us to have the opportunity to test this model. And I do believe that we have a commitment within council to review this after 4 billing periods. Every opportunity that we have when we make motions is to also have the ability to review those motions in the future. I think we need to move forward to have the opportunity to test this in the real environment. We'll be going into what hopefully be a regular year. And I think this is the year for us to try a new method, because every year after this, whether it be 5, 7, or 10 years, we will need to continue to add capital dollars to be able to make sure we have the monies to maintain our water treatment plant. So that is why I made the motion and would support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Melnick. Councillor Wilson.
Well, thank you for the motion, Councillor Melnick. And I was in full support of this up until just about a week ago, and we did have some correspondence from residents, and honestly, we most likely will have more. Unfortunately, that correspondence came a little late in the game, and although it doesn't go overlooked, and I think, as Councillor Melnick has suggested, we are going to have to tweak things. We're going to have to review this in say 4 billing cycles, and as long as we have that opportunity, and I think we always do, there's going to be some growing pains. Unfortunately, some residents have already forecasted the challenges or the changes that are going to affect them. I think there will be more. Unfortunately, it's not perfect, but I do think we have to move forward, and I am in support of reading this for the third time.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Demota, and then Councillor Calaharampi.
I made the comment before that, you got to listen to the silent majority sometimes. And that was before Trump used it, by the way. I just want to say, though, at the same time, there was a comment made that other utilities have gone up and people are facing bigger bills, and so is the municipality. So, and that's why we're in the predicament that we're in as well. However, we just approved a 12.9% increase in the budget. A lot of people are going to be affected by that. And I think, I'm still weary about going forward with this in this particular format with this schedule, because it's going to affect people who are being affected the most by the pandemic right now. So there's a potential to really damage some, businesses and in their ability to pay these utilities. So that's where my concern is. And I don't want to ask for the money up front and then give them a credit. So right now, I think that that inequity is visible in front of us. And before going forward, I'd rather address that and then see if we can make a more wholesome solution where we're not going to drastically affect somebody. I believe the sense is that, you know, we all have to take an increase, but to what percent is going to be the most tolerable across the board. And I think because there is a little bit of a fringe issue here, I don't want people to be adversely affected. So I can't support this motion in the format it's in right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dewatering. Councillor Kelleher-Anthy.
In the budget, we have approved the 37%. They need 1.96 water, 3.56 sewer across the board in order for the budget to work. Our residents have come and said it has inequities already within the new format. I find it hard to support something when we're saying that some people are going to have a 400% increase and others aren't. So would it be not fair for now to make it 37% across the board? We know we have to get it in order for the utilities to start. There's nothing stopping council for going back, looking at this. We can bring this in April. We can readdress it early in the year and move on. We can change the formula. We can make it fair across the board, 37%. We look at it, but are we starting out fair to everybody or not? We're already recognizing that the model is flawed. I don't know if I can support this, knowing that it's flawed.
Thank you, Councillor Kelleher-Anthy. Further debate? I will speak to the motion, and I am inclined to support it with some reservation. I appreciate how difficult it is when the inequities have been particularized for us. We knew that there would be some, and that is why a week ago or 2 weeks ago we discussed a review after 4 billing cycles, so in the fall of next year. I do really appreciate, and I want to extend my thanks to those members of the public who did communicate, and I don't fault them for the timing of their submissions. This has been difficult. It's been before council for a very long time, and it has been challenging. But until very recently, there were no numbers to attach to the theoretical discussion. So it was difficult for any member of the public to really understand what the impact was going to be. And so once we gave first and second reading, they had something to work with, and they did respond and did some, I think, significant work providing us a spreadsheet that is a valuable piece of information. And even though I recognize that there will be some inequities, I am prepared to state now that I would, down the road, make a motion in respect to credits to try and rectify any inequity that we think was improperly imposed. And that's maybe not perfect, but it is recognition that we don't wish to create inequity in the community. And in fact, this entire bylaw is predicated on finding more equity in the system. My concern is that even by delaying, we set up a hugely inequitable situation. I don't know how we proceed with the budget and everything else. Customers have to know what to expect, and we have obligations to raise a certain amount of revenue. And yes, there will be some pain, but there are opportunities, I think, to address that pain further down the road. So difficult as it may be, and recognizing that nothing is going to be perfect and it will take time to adjust. I nevertheless support Councillor Melnick in the motion, but recognizing too that we will come back to this. We're committed to that as a council, and for myself, and of course I can't commit council to anything like this, but I am absolutely prepared to look at a credit system moving forward to find redress for those customers and utility users who we later determine have been unfairly burdened, assuming that we come to that determination. So on that, I would support the motion, recognizing how difficult it is, and once again, thanking those members of the public who have drawn some of these issues to our attention. In closing, and not related to the motion, this is incredibly difficult work. None of us, well, I'll speak more for myself, have been trained to sort out these sort of equitable questions. I think it would be fair of us to find perhaps $2,500 in the budget and provide an incentive and open a contest to the community. If anybody can find a solution that does equity for all and meets the principles of consumption, capital, and connection fees in a utility rate bylaw, then they win the prize. And the judgment would be whether or not council endorses that as a changed utility rate. But this is tough, and I'm happy that the community is engaged to the extent they are, and I hope they continue to be engaged. That was long, but I will support the motion. Anyone else wish to speak to the motion? Well, Councillor Demoda, you can't close. I'll go back to Councillor Melnick, but all right, I will allow you to speak a second time on the motion.
I just wanted to say that was lengthy, and for the greater group, I am working on keeping mine down, because I know how painful those diatribes can be. Not that yours was, but I appreciate that, and I appreciate your insight and your animation towards our situation here, because we do have to have some levity. I mean, we've all been working hard, and I think that for me, this brought back some anxiety of having to pay those big bills when I was a shop owner back in a different life. So that's kind of where I'm sitting now, and I can empathize with some of those people. I didn't want to add more to this, but I appreciate you giving me the time.
Thank you. Please excuse my diatribe. Councillor Melnick, you may close.
Thank you, Your Worship. And again, thank you to administration for the work that they did to get us to this point. I agree with your comments completely, and we will look forward to the vote. Thank you.
All right, the motion is that Council give third and final reading to bylaw number 243, utility rate bylaw for 2022. All those in favor? Opposed? There are 2 opposed. That is carried. So thank you all. Thanks again to members of the public who engaged in this process. Very much appreciated. That takes us to agenda item 7, request for decision. First, the childcare strategy development. Mr. Gibbon, is that you, or will you pass that on? I saw Ms. Daniel on the screen as well.
Your Worship, Ms. Daniel is here, and both of us are available to answer questions. Recognizing that the committee did get a full presentation on the material last week, and the recommendation here now reflects the recommendation from committee. And that's the same with all of the RFDs are here. They're ones that you are essentially sending to yourselves. And so for the information of the public, happy to provide a little bit of an overview. And both Ms. Daniel and I are here and available to answer any questions that you might have. Last year, Council directed administration to identify opportunities to develop a community childcare strategy. Ms. Daniel has done some work to identify an appropriate not-for-profit partner in the University of Alberta Community University Partnership. They've provided a proposal that you see in the package on developing an early learning and childcare strategy for Jasper that would be focused on accessibility, affordability, quality, flexibility, and inclusivity. And it would do two major functions. It would first describe our current status of childcare in the community. And to be clear, when I'm saying childcare, this is not only the municipality. There are other forms of childcare that are happening in the community. So this would first describe the current state, and then it would look at what an ideal future vision for the community would be, and then it would describe alternatives that are available to meet that future vision. There would be a significant amount of stakeholder engagement, and the study and recommendations to council. The study would occur through the spring into the summer, and with recommendations to come to council in late summer, early fall. With that, I won't go through the entire thing again because Ms. Daniel did a much better job than me last week. So we'll leave it there and just ask if council has any questions for either she or I.
Questions from council? Councillor Waxer.
This actually isn't a question, but I just wanted to express my appreciation for being able to access such a comprehensive study at such a reasonable fee, and to acknowledge that this opportunity springs from long established relationships that I know Ms. Daniels has cultivated, and also with respect to the long-term commitment from the municipality of Jasper for high quality childcare. I don't believe that all communities would be in a position to leverage such an opportunity. So I wanted to express my appreciation.
Thank you, Councillor Waxer. Are there any other questions for Ms. Daniel or administration generally with respect to the matter that comes before us in any event as a committee recommendation, no longer an administrative recommendation? If there are no questions, I would entertain a motion. Councillor Waxer.
I guess I should have left the mic on. That council approved the engagement with Rob Bushman from the University of Alberta Community University Partnership as presented to develop an early learning and childcare strategy.
Is there any debate? Did you wish to open debate at all, Councillor Waxer? Is there any debate? If I may, then I'm going to propose for Councillor Waxer what I hope might be a friendly amendment. And my concern goes back to concerns I raised when this matter was discussed in committee of the whole. Approving the motion with the template presented, I think, limits the scope, and maybe we will never get all of the scope that I would prefer. But my concern basically is that describing a desired future and then recommending steps exclusive of costs puts us in a dangerous position. If the desired future is a Cadillac and we never have the opportunity to discuss whether we can afford a Cadillac, then I think we will, at the end of this, be forced to be in a position where we have to go out and get the whole model costed again. And even though there is some indication that we could get this all done before the next budget cycle, I have some concern that we won't, and then we will be into another year. But rather than add a costing element necessarily, my proposal would be to simply adjust the wording of the motion a bit to say that council approve engaging, not the engagement, because the engagement is very specific, but we approve engaging Rob Bushman from University of Alberta Community University Partnership to develop a Jasper early learning and childcare strategy and leave out the words as presented, to leave at least some flexibility that maybe what we can get is more than what is on the table now. And if it has to come back for another view of costs, that is the cost of the contract, I'd be open to that, because I would rather spend the money now and get the product we need than to spend some now and be in a position in the fall to have to go back out to another consultant to cost all of this. So what I think are small amendments, and I hope are friendly. Again, the council approve engaging Rob Bushman from University of Alberta Community Partnerships to develop a Jasper early learning and childcare strategy. But I leave it to you, Councillor Waxer, if you find that you prefer the motion as it's presented, then I will simply accept that.
I need a moment.
Take that moment by all means, Councillor Demota.
Well, I really like that insight, Your Worship, because, you know, I've said in the past when it comes to studies to be upfront about what our ask is and to be clear to the people we're asking the questions. And I fully support, you know, like from the experience that we've had together, this is your friendly amendment is a good approach. And I think that it will provide for a better outcome. And I just wanted to say that I support that.
I think that I can live with that friendly amendment. I've looked at it, and I think that that will be okay.
Thank you for that. Does anybody wish to speak to the motion? If not, then I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And thank you. I echo Councillor Waxer's opening comments. Thank you, Ms. Daniel, and thank you, staff, for giving us an opportunity that would not be available to other communities. Very much appreciated. That takes us to agenda item 7.2, wastewater treatment plant dewatering upgrades. Mr. Gibbon.
Yes, Your Worship. We do have a process for getting water out of things at the wastewater treatment plant that we don't want water in. I will leave the details of that to your own imagination. The report in front of you is a recommendation from committee. The council award the supply of two different pieces of equipment, a centrifuge at a cost of $283,000 and a polymer system at a cost of $272,500 to the two different firms that are listed in the recommendation in the report. These two pieces of equipment are vital to the operation of the wastewater treatment plant, and the centrifuge in particular, the existing one in the wastewater treatment plant is at the end of its life. Administration and our operator have been doing what they can to squeeze every last ounce of useful lifespan out of the current machinery there, but it is just at the end of its lifespan. These funds, the funds available for this project, and this is a part of a larger capital improvement project at the wastewater treatment plant, but the funds for these two purchases were included in the 2021 capital budget and were carried forward into the 2022 capital budget as a part of a $2.25 million project. So your worship, the money is in the budget. This project has been contemplated for a couple of years now. The equipment is at the end of its useful life, and its low efficiency operation is impacting costs at the wastewater treatment plant. And even worse than that, there could be a significant risk should the equipment fail. So for all those reasons, administration recommended to committee, and committee supported the recommendation to award the purchase of these two pieces of equipment towards that larger capital project.
Thank you, Mr. Given. If there are no further questions, this does again come to us as a recommendation from committee, having been discussed there, I think January 25th in depth, and leading to this recommendation to council. If there are not other questions for administration, I would invite a motion from a councillor. Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I would make the motion that council direct administration to award the contract to Andritz for the supply of a centrifuge at a cost of $283,000, and that council direct administration to enter into contract with Capital H2O for the provision of the polymer system at a cost of $272,500.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I'll invite you to speak to the motion if you wish.
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Any debate required? I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you. That takes us to agenda item 7.3, elected official education program. Again, this comes to us by way of committee recommendation to council based on a presentation a week ago. Should be no requirement, I would think, for any questions of administration, so I would invite a councillor who is prepared to do so, probably a councillor other than Councillor Hall, to make a motion. Councillor Wilson?
I'll make that motion.
And that motion is that...
That motion is that council approve the attendance of Councillor Hall at the upcoming March 14th to 16th, 2022 elected officials education program course in Edmonton.
Thank you for that. Is there any debate? I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you, and well done, Councillor Hall. Ongoing education is of prime importance. That takes us to agenda item 7.4. Keep Alberta RCMP Community Engagement Tour. Again, coming to us from a committee recommendation from January 25th, I believe. Are there any questions for administration regarding this matter? All right, again, I would invite a motion from a councillor. Councillor Wilson?
I'll make the motion the council approve the attendance of any councillor at a Keep Alberta RCMP information session from the attached list of dates.
Thank you. Any debate required? I just have a couple of comments. I am in support of the motion. I take it any means all or any, and everybody recognizes that by using the word any councillor, we mean every councillor, any councillor who wishes. And is it correct? And I know there was an email earlier from Councillor Melnick. Is this the course that you have already subscribed for, or is that a different course?
Thank you, Your Worship. As you saw earlier in this particular item on the memo from Colin Bushman, there were virtual sessions, and I had the opportunity, as did Councillor Waxer, to listen into the virtual sessions, which we chose to do. The reference to that I made was to the provincial government looking for individuals to register, not for this particular session, but for the engagement with municipal officials, which will be on March 31st in Edson. So 2 separate opportunities.
Thank you for that clarity then. And I would simply suggest then that if you're registered, but it is not otherwise recognized, perhaps you could arrange to get something before us so that council approval can be issued before the end of March. But I do appreciate the clarity. And so that motion is before us, and it's a different issue than Councillor Melnick was just addressing. But if you're ready, I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Takes us to agenda item 8, correspondence for information, consideration, or action. I think there is nothing that we have not addressed. Is there any other new business? Hearing nothing, agenda item 10, the motion action list is before us just as information and to keep people current. It was adjusted and approved at our last committee of the whole meeting, which takes us to agenda item 11, councillors' reports. Do we have reports from councillors? Councillor Keller-Rampe.
Last Thursday, Councillor Demota and I virtually attended the Community Futures meeting, and we passed our budget for the upcoming year.
Thank you. Any other reports? Councillor Demota.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the first environmental responsibility community conversations took place last Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. And I have to say it was a bit emotional for me, but at the same time, some really good conversations came out of it. It was really good to have Mr. Greathead there to speak to a lot of current municipal initiatives, as well as, there was a question of where we were at with the community sustainability plan. And there was some clarification on that going forward, and that people know that we're working with Parks Canada to get some more involvement on that in the future. But it was great to see the participation, and I hope to see it grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Councillor Waxer.
Yes, I attended the Yellowhead Regional Library orientation session for elected officials in January, and it was interesting and informative.
Thank you, Councillor Waxer. Any other reports? I will report then that Wednesday last week, Councillor Wilson and I attended a West Yellowhead Regional Waste Management Authority Board meeting. We have authorized the admission of a new partner to that. Greenview County will be joining us, subject to some terms, but that is going to happen. And the transition to a commission has been slowed. The CAOs of the various member municipalities were present and presented concerns that they had with respect to getting a stronger memorandum of understanding operationalized between the municipalities before we move to a commission if we continue on that route. So there will be some work done in the short term to strengthen our operational capabilities in the short term so that we can maintain the services that we have and then figure out how to move forward. Also, last Wednesday was the first meeting of the Jasper Partnership Initiative in quite some time. It was put on hold as we transitioned to the Economic Recovery Task Force in the early stages of the pandemic, and stayed with that for quite some time. But we are now back to the partnership model and lots on the table for discussion. And Councillor Waxer, who is the alternate on that, had an opportunity to attend as well and just do a watching brief so that she will be prepared to step in if that becomes necessary sometime in the future. And finally, I will just mention in passing that I had an interview with CBC National last week. In fact, a pre-interview, but they are interested apparently in potentially putting a story together about the fact that Jasper has the highest percentage of vaccinations in the 5 to 11-year-old demographic in the province. And that is noteworthy for a number of reasons. And CBC is looking at making a story out of that. So whether or not that happens, full credit to parents in our community for keeping their children safe. Very much appreciated, and a good news story if it develops. Those are my reports. Is there anything else? If not, we have a list of upcoming events. The Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce general meeting next week. I take that's an in-person meeting. NETMA on February 16th. Also then I take it in person. Our emergency management training session, February 28th. And a strategic planning session, as we all know, April 4th to 6th. Is there anything else that needs to be brought to council's attention? If not, agenda item 13. Lucky 13. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Councillor Hall. Perfect. All those in favor? Thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you all for your time. Thanks to those members of the public who tuned in today. I think I saw a high of about 24, which is a good number again, and very appreciated to have that attention throughout the community on our efforts here. So thank you all for attending, and thank you staff and council, and good day to you all.
Before you all run
Thank
away,
Thank
Wanna
you,
let-
everybody.
sorry, before we all, I just wanted to let everybody know that Tuesday, the 22nd of February is going to be the 22nd of 2022, and it's a twos day. So there's lots of twos in there, and we're meeting as council, and I thought we could make some fun of it.
Thank you, Councillor Demota.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.